series is focused on starting your own business, and specifically is for those of you who are interested in starting a clinical consulting or a coaching practice. And we are really excited to be partnering with Simple Practice to present to you this series. Simple Practice is a leading cloud-based practice management software for more than 92,000 private practitioners. And I'd like to now turn it over to my partner, Ben Caldwell, who will be introducing his team and also sharing with you a little bit more about Simple Practice and lead our session today. So Ben, feel free to take it away.
Thank you so much, Yas, and thank you everybody at Pepperdine. I'm really excited to be offering this presentation today. I know it's been a tremendous challenge over the past year, retaining this critical sense of community in the great work that we do and throughout university relationships. And so I really appreciate your work in putting this together. And just so you all know, as you're watching me, I've got my camera adjacent to my screen, so I can see you when I'm looking this way, but when I'm looking this way, it looks like I'm looking at you. So don't feel like I'm turning away from you. This is actually me turning toward you. Again, my name is Ben Caldwell. I'm here as the Education Director for Simple Practice Learning, and our focus today is really going to be to consider what's next in your career. And this is meant to be very much a tangible hour. What I mean by that is that I hope that you come away from here with some very specific takeaways about things that you can be doing, not next year or next month or next week, but really right now to move closer to the kind of career that you ultimately want for yourself. And the sort of formal title for this is Starting Your Own Business, Clinical Consulting or Coaching Practice. We're going to be spending particular time on some of the tools that can help you get there. In terms of how this next hour breaks down, we'll spend about 5 minutes on introductions. So I'll introduce myself in a little more detail, and I'll talk about the other folks who are here with us from Simple Practice today. We will spend about 10 minutes really thinking through visualizing what's next in your career. You may already have a very specific idea of what that looks like, and you may not. Either way, it's okay. Our intention is to give you the opportunity to think that through and maybe come up with some specific ideas of what you'd like that to be. We will spend about 20 minutes on designing effective workflows. And I understand that is not the sexiest topic name in the world, but I think that you'll find that's going to be a really rich and fruitful area to get into when we think about setting up the kind of work that you want to be doing, that not only helps you fulfill your mission, the reasons that you got into this work in the first place, but that also fits into the kind of life that you want for yourself. It allows you to serve that mission more effectively with less anxiety. We'll spend about 15 minutes then in breakout sessions on overcoming particular pain points. So some of the things that professionals often struggle with when they are in the process of trying to build a dream career. And then we will report back. We will talk about kind of what we got out of those small group discussions and see if any kinds of themes emerge that can be useful to all the rest of us. So the intention here is for this to be a pretty full hour. We want to make good use of your time. We know your time is valuable and greatly appreciate your carving time out to be here with us today. So hopefully you get a lot out of it. To introduce myself, I said I'm the Education Director for Simple Practice Learning. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I worked in the academic world as a full-time faculty member for about a decade, and during that time was also building a private practice. So one of the things you'll hear me talk about today is my own journey in building that practice and a couple of specific areas where tools were particularly helpful to me in that process. I also, you may be familiar with me from like books that I've written and advocacy stuff that I've done in the mental health world. Please know, though, that while my particular career has been on this mental health trajectory, that the intention of our presentation today is to be broadly applicable. So if you're looking at building a career as a clinician, fantastic. Whether that's in a private practice setting or another setting, either way works. Whether you're working on building a career as a consultant, well, that's a good fit here too. We're going to talk about principles that broadly apply. And if you have some other kind of business in mind, some other kind of work for yourself, all of what we're talking about here is really meant to be broadly applicable. The other folks who are here from Simple Practice, we have Amber Eddings, who's a senior product specialist. Amber, you want to unmute and say hi real quick?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, happy Thursday, everyone. So good to see such wonderful attendance. I've been with Simple Practice since 2018, and I also happen to be working my way through the Pepperdine MFT program as well. So I am benefiting just as much by being here. So really happy to be here today.
Thank you, Amber. We also have Mariana Barajas, who's a product specialist and an associate professional clinical counselor. Mariana, you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Mariana. Like Ben said, I do have a master's in counseling from Loyola Marymount. Before starting at Simple Practice, I worked as an intern and an associate at a nonprofit that focused on family reunification. And currently, I am a group practice specialist at Simple Practice. So what that means is I help onboard group practices that are new to our software, as well as I help troubleshoot anything along the way.
Thank you, Mariana. And lastly, we have Jameson Morell, Dr. Jameson Morell. I sometimes leave that out and I shouldn't. Dr. Morell, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name's Jameson, as Ben said. So in addition to being a team member at Simple Practice, I also have my master's in professional psychology and my doctorate in clinical psychology, both from William James College in Massachusetts. And I'm also a licensed psychologist in the state of Massachusetts, and really honored to be here with all of you today.
Thank you very much, Jameson. A couple of other folks who are here with us behind the scenes. I will not ask them to come on mic, but just so that you all know that they are with us. We've got Deepa Shah, who's our Director of Partnerships, and we have Nick Allen, who's going to be helping run some of the breakout rooms kind of behind the scenes. So really appreciative for everybody on our team being here, but we're also here in service of you all in attendance. So again, grateful that you took the time today. Because of the number of folks here, we're not going to ask everybody in attendance to briefly introduce themselves, but we do want you to benefit from this time in terms of connecting and networking and being a part of a community. So when we do the breakout rooms a little bit later, one of the things that we will ask you to do is briefly introduce or reintroduce yourself to the other folks who are in that breakout room with you. All of us here from Simple Practice are happy to represent the company. If you've heard of Simple Practice, we again do practice management software, but we are rapidly growing in service of the professionals that we work with. Our aim is to give folks a well-integrated set of tools that make it easier for the professionals on our platform to do the good work that they do and spend less time on the sort of administrative elements of running their business. So client scheduling and messaging and billing and all those things that often take a lot of time away from client care, those are all things that are dramatically simplified within Simple Practice. So let's start with a visualization exercise. And don't worry, I'm not going to do a whole meditation thing. You've got plenty of experience with that. You know how to do that. But I want to think through briefly what you want your dream practice or your dream career, your dream business to look like. What is the role that you are serving? And what I mean by that is, are you kind of the one in charge? Are you the head of the company? Or are you serving within a particular narrower kind of role because that's the work that you love doing and you want to be part of a group that is together accomplishing a mission, but you want to be working on a particular thing within that group? Similarly, who are you serving? Most of us get into these kinds of fields because it's a calling for us. It fulfills some kind of a sense of mission. It's not that we get into these fields to help people broadly, although we certainly do want to help people. Most of us had a sense of wanting to help a particular group of people in a particular way, either because of our own history or because of some need that we see out in the world that we feel compelled to help meet. So who is it that you are serving? What population are you working with? Next, how are you working? What kinds of tasks are you fulfilling? What's your schedule? Are you somebody who's working evenings so that you can spend time with families? Are you interested in working like a 6-hour day so you can spend more time with your own family? And all of this is to what end? So your work probably fulfills some meaningful sense of mission for you, but what is your why? And I mean, not only in terms of the work that you're doing, but in the life that you are setting up for yourself. So what is the thing that you are trying to do? What is the impact that you are trying to have? And it's worth taking a minute here. If you have some paper in front of you, or even you have a cell phone, you can pull up the Notes app. Just make a couple of quick notes. It doesn't need to be organized. It can just be a couple of bullet points or a sentence. What do you want your work to ultimately look like? Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a super clear sense of what that is right now, that's okay. Go ahead and note down whatever parts of it you feel pretty clear about, that are resolved in your mind, even if some other parts aren't fully resolved in your mind. I also sometimes, in talking to folks about stuff like this, will talk to people who will say, well, I've got a sense of where I'd like to be in 2 or 3 years, but 20 years from now, I don't really know. That's okay. If you've got a sense of that 2 or 3 year window, go ahead and talk from that 2 or 3 year window. I'll give you a moment here to take a couple of notes. If you're not in your dream role now, and most of us aren't, identify some specific tasks. This would sort of be the next thing on your sheet that would take to move closer to it. And I really want to underscore that phrase, move closer, because the intention isn't that you make one leap from here to there, but rather that you take some of the small steps that are necessary as part of maybe a longer journey to get to the place that you want to be. So if you right now are working on hours of experience toward a particular mental health license, okay, well, one of the things that you probably need to do to get to the place where you're doing the work that you want to do is get licensure. That makes a lot of sense. So what do you need to do, know, or have in order to move a little bit closer to that ideal state? Folks who are interested in ultimately building a consulting business, well, what areas of knowledge do you feel really solid in? And what areas of knowledge do you feel like you could still stand to gain some? Because maybe those are areas that you need to know more about as a way of moving a little bit closer to your ideal work state. Part of what I like about this part of the exercise is that you should be identifying things that you can start to work on right now. If there are gaps in your knowledge, well, gaps in your knowledge are pretty easy to start to fulfill. Those are things that you can seek out. Understandably, of course, if you have the process of licensure standing in your way, well, every hour of experience that you get toward that license is a step closer to where you'd like to be. But think more broadly than that, too. If you have a sense of what you want to do after you're licensed, well, what do you need to do, know, or have to be ready on day one when you get licensed to go ahead and set up that kind of work for yourself? Some of the things that you think about here, and please do go ahead and make notes on your paper or in your notes app, some of those things may not be realistic or achievable right now. So if you're interested in starting a business and you know that you are going to need some seed money to start that business, well, you might not be in a place where you are able to get that kind of funding right now, and that's okay. But some of the other things are more achievable. So can you highlight the ones that are ripe, that are the low-hanging fruit, the things that you can start working on right away? And with those things that are blockers, what would it take to actually get through that, to resolve that as an issue that is standing in your way? Sometimes when I'm talking with people about their career progression, they will say, well, I'd like to ultimately do blank, but, and they will run off the list of reasons why they can't do that thing or don't think that it's realistic. And I'm really interested in what comes after that word but, because all of those things that sort of people find deflating, or that you might think is a long-term barrier, If we drill down on those things enough, there are probably steps that you can be taking right now to make those um, less substantive, to make them less in your way as you get closer to them. As we say here, be as specific and granular as possible. So if you're in a job that you're in because you have to pay rent and you have to put food on the table, but you don't necessarily love the job, well, it makes sense that you can't necessarily quit that to give you the time to move closer to your ideal work state. But one of the things that you maybe can do is ask for a raise. One of the things that you can do is take steps within that work environment to make the work environment better, or even work with people in your workplace now to say, hey, here are my sort of long-term goals. Do you have goals that are in common with that? Could we use some of our work time to move closer to those goals in ways that are going to be valuable to what we're doing here, as well as being valuable to us in the longer term? And if you're familiar with the concept of SMART goals, I'm a huge believer of applying that concept to career development and career planning. So the goals that you set out for yourself should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time limited. If you have a sort of pie in the sky dream of what you'd like to be doing eventually, that's great. And that can be a huge motivator and a big driver to the work that you are doing today. And also, it's worth putting some deadlines on, okay, I know that this is the next step to get there. I'd like to be at that next step by such and such a date. And then just as you would with the treatment plan, and I'll talk a little bit more about this process here in a minute, but just as you would with the treatment plan, when that date comes, if you are not where you'd like to be at that time, okay, fine. But what that does is call on you to make changes to that plan or make changes to the goals, or use that deadline as a motivator to say, okay, it's time, I'm ready, let's do the next thing. Regardless of the kind of work that you are hoping to do ultimately, it's going to be in your interest to have some kind of a strategy document and some kind of a budget. So when we talk about strategy documents, we're talking here really about a business plan if you are looking at building your own business. A business plan, there are lots of different ways to do this. You can find examples online. You can find different templates for them. There's no singular right way to do a business plan. But the idea is that it's a narrative. It kind of tells the story of the work that you do, supported by financial projections of how you're going to get from where you are now to where you'd like to be. A lot of business plans recognize that starting a new business is inherently challenging, inherently risky, and it involves spending some money as an investment so that you can work to build your clientele, work to build your business, and hopefully by whatever the timeline is in the business plan, come out in really great shape. A great thing about having a business plan is that when you identify specific milestones, specific progress indicators along the way, then you can kind of gauge your progress every quarter, every 6 months, or every year against that business plan. Okay, how well are we doing compared to what we thought, what we expected this process was going to look like? A budget is more detailed. It goes over planned income, planned expenses in specific categories. A business plan might start to get into some of those specific categories a little bit, especially when you're identifying more significant kinds of investments that you need to make. But a budget is much more detailed. And it's typically shorter term because it's hard to make really specific projections that are farther out in time. It should align with your business plan, but it's more granular and it's less a strategy document and really more of an accounting document. It is where do I expect to be spending my money? Where do I expect the money to come in from? Of course, you want to be realistic about early income and expenses. You're not going to make as much right out of the gate as you might hope to, but you want to make sure that this is guided by that business plan in terms of being smart about where you're spending money, where you're willing to accept making a little bit less in order to build. And then how long are you willing to tolerate making a little bit less in the process of building? One of the things that our CEO, Howard Specter, talks about a lot is this difference between cost and investment, where both of those things are parts of building a business. You have some things that are genuine costs, that are money that you have to spend and you don't expect meaningful return back. They're sort of essentials. So a cost might be utilities in an office, right? You have to have them. Your business kind of can't function without them. And so that is money that is spent without much expectation in the way of return. But an awful lot of what we do, an awful lot of getting the tools and equipment that we need to build a business is really better thought of as investment. We expect it to pay off. We expect it not just to fulfill some kind of foundational need, but to make it easier for us to do the work that we do. That's an investment. So when we're looking at things like practice management software is a great example, other software that you use to build your business or run your business, that's an investment if it's working well. It should make it easier for you to focus on the critical work that you are doing by automating some other tasks or simplifying some other tasks. If that software is doing its work well, it's paying off, because whatever you're spending for it in terms of a cost per month or maybe a one-time cost, depending on the software, if it is saving you time every single month, boy, that's a good investment, because that means you are valuing your time enough to spend some money to get time back that you can use elsewhere on other elements of moving closer to this kind of ideal work state. There are some things that you will definitely need in the process of building a business. Interestingly, office space is becoming less necessary. One of the things that we've learned over the past year is that it is possible to effectively run a fully virtual business or a fully virtual practice. That being said, if you have a mental health license, if you have a need to receive mail, if anything else requires some kind of a physical space, then you do need either an office like a physical office or a virtual office. A virtual office is usually in an office building, but it's basically just a mailbox within that office building. And the office building might receive mail for you, and you could, go in occasionally, use a workspace there if you'd like to, but you don't have an office that is yours in that building. I've known a lot of folks in the past year who have transitioned over to that model and are doing all of their work remotely, either from home or for anywhere else that they might travel to, and then using some kind of a virtual office space as their sort of address of record. With technology, of course, in order to make that virtual office setup work, you're going to need technology. You're going to need an appropriate computer, appropriate internet, appropriate camera. Part of the reason why I've got this camera off to the side of my computer is because this is a fancy DSLR and it gives you nice depth of field, and I get to feel like I'm in a movie when I'm presenting to you. Whereas the webcam that is on my computer right next to the camera is terrible and grainy and doesn't make for a very good picture. If I'm wanting to meet with clients using my video conferencing equipment, it actually is a much better way to do it using this camera over here, because it feels like a more professional connection. So when you're investing in technology, you need to consider the life cycle of that technology. Thankfully, things are advancing really, really quickly. It does mean sometimes you'll have difficult decisions to make about, do I make a software or an equipment purchase that's a one-time purchase versus having a monthly cost for using software or renting a particular piece of equipment. That's obviously sort of subjective math, right? You've got to figure out for yourself what works best there given your needs and the kind of equipment. But just know that it's worth thinking that through. Is this something I can buy once and use for at least a few years, probably not going to be forever, but at least for a few years? Or is this something that I'm going to have ongoing need to continually improve? And then licenses and permits. You need to have probably more than a professional license if you are professionally licensed. You still need a business license in most areas of the state. And if you're going to sell anything that requires the collection of sales tax, you also need a seller's permit. The other kinds of licenses and permits that you'll need to build your business vary depending on the kind of work that you're doing and the area in which you are setting up this business. I know a couple of years ago that the state was trying to set up this sort of portal that you could go to and say, okay, I live at X address and I'm doing Y kind of work. And it was going to give you this list of all the licenses and permits that you might need at the local, county, and state level. And they went so far as building out a prototype of this. It was such a mess. It was so complicated that last I knew, they weren't continuing to work on the project actively. So it is complicated, but it's complicated only in knowing initially what you need. The actual processes of getting these things, other than your professional license, which admittedly takes a while, usually isn't too bad. A business license is a pretty quick application online, same for a seller's permit. You just need to take these steps so that you are structurally sound and that you've met all the regulatory requirements for the work that you're doing. I talked about cost versus investment earlier. One of the smartest things that you can do, and one of the dumbest things that I didn't do earlier in my career, was to invest in expertise. If you have knowledge gaps, as we all do, and you encounter some work that you need to do for your business, you've really got two choices. One is to spend the time growing your area of knowledge so that you can do that thing yourself. And that's got great value. I love learning new stuff and new ways of building my business, new areas of knowledge that I wouldn't have had before. I love that process, but it does require time. And even investing a fair amount of time into any new area of knowledge, you're probably not, in the span of a short time period, going to bring yourself up to the same level as somebody who has a whole degree or a long educational process in that thing. So your other option is to pay for someone else's time, pay for a professional. And I am a big believer that you will actually spend less by paying for a professional when it comes to payroll, taxes, legal costs, and some of the marketing stuff that you're going to do. Not all marketing is sometimes its own animal, but at least some of the marketing stuff that you're going to do, you will ultimately save so much money relative to your own costs in terms of time and failed experiments doing it on your own by hiring somebody who is really solid, knows what they're doing, knows your industry, and has a good, solid track record. I'm going to talk a little bit now about designing effective workflows. And again, the intention here is that we're going to help the rubber meet the road in terms of building your own business. It does require a little bit of theoretical background, but I promise I'm not going to hang out in theory all day. I do want to talk a little bit about the black box model of communications because it is relevant when we think about principles of business building. So my world is mental health and mental health care. I mentioned I'm licensed as an MFT, and I had the honor of training under Jay Haley. And if you don't know his name, he was a early model developer in the world of family therapy, developed this model called strategic therapy, and it's based in part on this black box model of communications. The argument that he and other strategic therapy folks made in developing their model is that, man, we spend an awful lot of time in the world of psychology trying to get inside somebody's head, when the best we can really do is make guesses and inferences about what's actually going on in there. If we're interested in the functioning of a system, that is to say, how people interact with one another, who has power, who has influence, and how we can enter into that system in a way that we can have power and influence that we can use well to the benefit of the people that we're working with, it's actually not a great use of time to build our models on what we think maybe kind of might be going on inside of someone's head. He said the better way to do this was to work from basically a black box model, that we don't know, and to put it bluntly, we don't much care what's going on inside someone's head. We care more about inputs and outputs. In other words, what is the communication that goes in to someone, and then what do they communicate back, either through body language or through what they're actually saying out loud? Because behavior, body language, that's still communication, right? That still counts. It's not just words. But the argument was that we shouldn't be speculating about what's going on internally when we can learn effectively about a system by the communication going in, the communication coming out. And what we see from that, what we gain from that, is some simplification, right? Because there are other models of family therapy. And listen, I don't do strategic therapy in my actual therapeutic work. I just think it's really helpful to think about in this context. What we gain from that is a lot of simplification when it comes to understanding where and how to meet with clients, where and how to interact. I know far too many therapists, educators, consultants, and people in a wide variety of fields who have their business cell phone, who have a website with a contact form, and that contact form maybe goes to email, or it maybe goes to its own sort of bucket, its own place. They have a directory listing on some professional directory listing somewhere that, again, communications there might live in their own bucket, or they might go to a different place. And they have all these different ways that prospective clients or current clients can reach out to them. And I get it, you want to be as easily reachable as possible. But when you have all of those different channels, all those different ways by which people can reach you, that is potentially an awful lot of communication coming into you in different ways, often with this kind of shotgun approach, right? If you've got a client or a prospective client who doesn't know how to reach you, they're trying to get a hold of you, and they see that you have all these different channels, they're probably not going to try just one. They'll probably try several of them to see what works best because they don't know. And so you have multiple communication channels coming in. Some of it is duplicative. And you have to deal with the anxiety of managing all these different channels every single day. Because, right, if you're building a business, one of the things that you don't want to let happen is for a prospective client to slip by you. So you might have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different communication channels that you are checking every day, sometimes multiple times a day if you're expecting a contact back. And it is a major source of anxiety. Not only that, but it ultimately does mean that you're probably going to drop the ball somewhere. And I mean nothing about you individually in saying that. It's just human nature, right? If we've got all these different sort of balls in the air that we're trying to juggle, all these different communication channels that we're trying to manage, then inevitably something is going to get missed, something is going to get dropped. And that is a prospective client, or even maybe a current one, who is wanting to hear from you and is not going to hear back from you. So we should be working smarter and not harder. I'm a big believer in data-driven decision-making. I'm a big believer in efficiency. We all should be experimenting, be very comfortable experimenting in the process of building our businesses, in the process of moving closer to where we want to be. And also, we need to be able to cut our losses for those experiments that don't work, and narrow the channels of communication so that we can rest more assured that anytime somebody's trying to reach us, they're actually going to reach us, right? So when you have a process that is singular, I use the phrase here, simple, singular, and seamless, clients know how to best get a hold of you and when to get a response. You know that you're not going to miss anything because everything is coming into one or maybe 2 channels. Now, there are all kinds of different ways to do this. You might have heard news coverage over the past couple of years about how younger professionals are ditching voicemail. They might still have a phone number, but that phone number basically says, please email me instead, and may or may not even accept incoming messages. Now, that may or may not be the right thing for you, but what I appreciate about that is this narrowing of channels. That, yes, if people need a phone number, you still have a phone number, but it's going to direct people back to that channel so that you're monitoring one thing instead of monitoring multiple things. If you've got a contact form on your website, it is coming to one place where you also receive other communications. it astonishes me when I talk with people who make these changes at how you can see the relief on their faces. And like I said, I'm a believer in experimenting. I think you should experiment in the course of building a business. Try out a new marketing avenue if you haven't tried it before and you think it might work. But if you think it might work at some point in the future, even though it's not working today and it hasn't worked for the past 3 months, then I start to wonder whether the cost to you of continuing to monitor that thing is still worth it. You can take these principles of simplifying and working smarter and not harder and apply them across different areas of business building. So with marketing, I had an associate who was working in my practice a few years ago who was very interested in working with the entertainment community around Los Angeles and did a great job of experimenting without a lot of emotional attachment with various ways of reaching this community, various forms of communication, various places to advertise. I think she, for like a week or so, experimented with a banner ad on the websites of one of the trade publications, right? Interesting, kind of cool idea, which I wouldn't have thought of on my own. It failed miserably. She got maybe 1 contact, maybe 0. But what was awesome to see about that was her willingness to experiment and her willingness to work from the data when that experiment didn't work. She wasn't upset about it. She just said, okay, well, that's knowledge. I can take that and use this knowledge in my other marketing efforts. You can experiment and also keep those channels pretty narrow, do just a couple of things at a time, not try to be everything to everybody all at once. With billing, we do have integrated billing within Simple Practice, and I will tell you that as far as my own story goes, that was the game changer for me. I had a small private practice. I did not realize how much time I was spending chasing down clients so that I could bill them for sessions, creating new billing records when they made payments, and also hunting back down old billing records when I was trying to figure out how much somebody owed or put together kind of a statement or a super bill for them. I was only seeing 5 or 10 clients a week. And yet, when I started doing the billing through my practice management software, all of a sudden I was saving 10 to 20 hours a month. I had no idea I'd been spending that much time on this one administrative task. Client relationships are the same way. We're not just talking about client load here, although you ought to be thoughtful about how many clients can you realistically work with at once. But with your client relationships, are those relatively simple and seamless on both sides? If you have a client who has something urgent that comes up, do they know the best way to reach you? Is it email, phone, or something else? And do they know that in a way that they know just one channel to go to, so that you're not getting duplicative communications from a client who's freaking out, not knowing how to best find you? When it comes to narrowing some of those channels or cutting some of the things that we do that aren't working, there's the natural human tendency of loss aversion, right? We don't want to cut off something that might work for us in the future, even if it's not working great today. To whatever degree we can, it's helpful to be a little bit cold and calculated about it, to divorce ourselves from the emotional attachment to a potential future success and focus on what is working right now or what we reasonably believe will be working in a short period of time. And when we're making those decisions, always be thoughtful about the direction of movement. Now, there are some times on your journey to where you want to be work-wise that you're going to have to take a detour or even move backwards a little bit. It's part of the process and it's okay, as long as you understand it as intentional and part of the process. As long as you're not taking steps with the hope of building your business that actually serve to set you back farther. I've already told you a little bit about my story when it comes to practice management software, so I'm not going to belabor the point. I will just say that this and other software tools makes life a lot easier. It allows you to focus on the stuff that you care most about by automating and simplifying the tasks that are more necessary but also administrative in nature. Now we've got about 15 minutes for small group discussion. Obviously, there was a lot of information up to there, so I apologize for moving through it pretty quickly, but I wanted to make sure you had time to talk in your small groups. Pull up your notes from earlier in this hour. And as you think about the next stage of your work, your practice, your career, whatever that looks like, what is one area of struggle that you see in getting there? One thing that stands in your way. And be as specific and tangible as you can here. And go ahead and if you've got one, go ahead and write it down in your notes. What I'm going to ask you to do in the small groups is do a very brief introduction of yourself, just 10 or 15 seconds, and then talk about this one thing as briefly and specifically as you can. What's the thing that you feel like stands in your way of getting closer to where you want to be? What I'm going to ask the rest of your group to do is help you with a couple of ideas about specific things that you might do, know, or have that will help you to overcome that particular struggle, whatever it might be. And the idea here is to be as specific and tangible as possible so that the person you're offering ideas to comes away from this with some very particular next steps. They know what they can do maybe later this afternoon to start moving closer to where they want to be. Now, you also can start to do this for yourself, right? So I don't know that we'll have time for everybody in each of the small groups, but we want to get through as many folks as we can. And if you don't have the chance to talk with your small group about it, then think through this same question, or even email some friends and family and basically say, this is where I want to go. This is the thing that or at least one thing that I think stands in my way. How can I take whatever small step forward this afternoon or this weekend? What is one thing that you would suggest that I do, know, or have to overcome that struggle? I and the other folks from Simple Practice are going to be kind of bouncing around these small group rooms, the breakout rooms, just to facilitate conversation, make sure things are flowing smoothly. But we will do our best to not disturb conversation that is already going well. And we will come back in, I guess, a little more than probably 10 minutes for some quick takeaways, some reporting out, and then we'll wrap up for the afternoon. So Nick, our magician behind the scenes, if you could send us all to the breakout rooms, I will see you all back here in just a little bit. All right, I think we've got folks back from the breakout rooms now. The discussion I heard was fantastic. So I really appreciate everyone's openness and participation. I know that some folks were talking about things that are sometimes not the easiest to talk about. So I really, really appreciate that. And I hope that you all got some good, tangible kind of next steps out of that. In the very first group that I was in, Sandy was in there with us and she started the conversation. And Sandy, if I can put you on the spot here, and it's okay to say no, you can always say, I prefer not. There was one thing that I mentioned I would like to come back to in a larger group. Would you be willing to mention what that was?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. So my struggle, I currently have a personal training business and I'm eventually hoping to move this into a physical meets mental health model of wellness once I get certified as a therapist. And my current struggle is a combo platter of imposter syndrome, meeting my own acceptance of like what I can offer and how this relates to asking for the right amount of payment for my services. And so that's a big chunk of it. And the great discussion that we just had kind of narrowed it down for me. And I think it all comes down to just really leaning into me deserving payment and knowing that what I have to offer is of value and that people will get something from it. So I think it's just really me struggling to just identify my own value that I provide and seeing that.
I appreciate that a lot. And you are certainly not alone in that. That's one of the themes that I heard in the rooms that I was able to visit briefly. A lot of people talked about that sense of kind of imposter syndrome. And we do have a couple of really useful articles on imposter syndrome at our Pollen magazine. It's free, so it's on the Pollen website. One of the imposter syndrome articles is one that I wrote a while back that I think might be particularly helpful. We've got some great resources that are there. The other things that I heard from the groups that I visited that I think are pretty common struggles, there is this question of valuing your own work. And of course, some of that's the emotional work that we all have to do about entering into a new field. And some of it is tied in with the imposter syndrome stuff. But I like to think back to the fact that very few people in the world, very few people in the US, relatively speaking, have a graduate degree in anything. Even fewer have a graduate degree in the stuff that you all have graduate degrees in. And even fewer than that are specializing in the ways that you all are specializing. They all have tremendous, tremendous value. When I talk with folks who are starting to question their knowledge or value, I say, hang out with folks who are outside of your industry for a while. It will be a very nice reminder of how much you know and how much that differs from what other people know about your field. And there's, of course, other stuff around marketing, specializing, finding your particular niche. We've got all these great resources through Pollen, through Simple Practice. Monarch is our online directory. And Simple Practice Learning, of course, has a whole bunch of both CE and business building content that you may find relevant. That kind of ends our presentation for today. We're coming in right at 12:59. How about that? The next couple of Jammy sessions are going to be May 13th and June 10th. I really hope that you found value in this today. Again, our effort was to make this as kind of tangible as possible in thinking about the next stage of your career. Hopefully we will see you in May and again in June. And want to say thanks again to everybody from Pepperdine that helped put this together, everybody on the Simple Practice team, and all of you for taking an hour out of the day with us. Thank you so, so much. Really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best as you work to move closer to that ideal career. Take care.